Welcome to another mega exciting Kingscrusher radio show. So this is around 9:10 on Tuesday. So this week we're going to continue looking at the rapid and blitz events which have been occurring at a high level with a world champion involved. Okay, so it's YourNextMove rapid, it's called. It's in Leuven, Belgium, I believe. Belgium. I want to make 100% sure of that. So the tournament is part of the Grand Chess Tour. This stage took place in Leuven, Belgium between the 15th and 21st of June, with 2 days of rapid games at 25 minutes per player and 10 seconds a move increment in a single round robin on the 17th and 18th, followed by another 2 days of blitz games, 5 minutes per player with 2 second increment in a double round robin on the 19th and 20th. Okay, so let's see in particular the games of Magnus Carlsen, and we'll take it round by round. We'll look at the decisive games as priority. So let's see, the first one I'd like to have a look at was played on the 17th of June. It was actually, okay, round 4 I believe actually. It's the first one on my list rather. Okay, so against Caruana we have e4 from Magnus. This is in round 4. e5 from Caruana. We have a Roy Lopez. Actually, let's put on live book and add a Kavitsa as well, just in case. Might be useful. So we have a Roy Lopez, a6. We have knight f6, d3, bishop c5. This has become very trendy now. Magnus is driving the trends on this variation. So bishop takes c6 and h3 to stop that pin. And now black supports e5 with knight d7. We have bishop e3. Black doesn't really in this game want to take on e3 anyway. It plays bishop d6, and by doing this the c pawn is free to move to try and clamp down this d4 square. We see that immediately happen actually after knight c3. Caruana clamps down on d4 by playing c5. We have knight d2, knight b8. That's an interesting undeveloping move, but the knight's destined for bigger things. a4, knight c6, a5, trying to put a cramp on black's expansion plans on the queen side. Bishop e6, both sides castle, knight c4. We have bishop e7, so maintaining that bishop, not wanting it to be captured maybe. b3. Black does play b5, which, yeah, it does undouble the pawns now. The problem is, if the knight goes back, well, this is actually quite good for black, it seems. Black's got a very comfortable position here, maybe just knight d4. So actually, by undoubling the pawns, there's a hope, I guess, that there's some weaknesses to exploit soon. Bishop d2, b5, knight e3, both knights eye d5 now, but that's parried. Knight b4 protects d5, and there's a certain amount of pressure on white's position. Knight e2, we have bishop g5. That looks like a very nice move actually, trying to discourage f4, but f4 is played anyway. After e takes, knight takes f4. White might be threatening to take and damage black's control of d4, because then d4 is possible if black does nothing against taking and d4. But black does something about that. a5, so he can recapture with the a pawn if needed. This would be a bad idea. I think black just recaptures. Possibly there's other reasons actually coming in to the equation here, like a4, so it's even that's possible. So anyway, we have bishop c3. looking at g7, knight c6, and knight ed5, knight d4, queen h5. Now here there is an idea to take, and either win h7 or win this bishop. That's the current threat to parry. Black took on f4, so knight takes f4, and white is actually threatening this pawn actually in this position. This move protects c5 but allows a5 to drop, and you might think, I was curious when I was playing this earlier, that if white wins a5 here, isn't this bishop like cut out of the game after b4? Isn't it a bit stranded? But this is actually what happened. Rook takes a5. It's a slight downside that the bishop could be a prisoner inside black's position now. Surely. This is exactly what happens. I think it seems to be taking intuitively a risk here. b4, the door is shut on this bishop. Knight takes. Now we have knight takes. That's the safer way to take. If black took with the pawn, then this is quite pleasant for white, and the bishop's actually finding a connection on d8. Okay, so taking with the knight, keeping this bishop a prisoner. Okay, it's looking at otherwise not too significant squares. Queen d5. Now the bishop is hit, it's protected, but it's pinned at the moment. Rook b8, rook a4, unpinning, and threatening bishop takes b4, hitting the queen. Queen b5. We have the move. Now this might be a mistake actually. d4. This looks. It's interesting. It's interesting, and possibly the idea is to give the bishop c7. I don't think black can take here. We can take there, and then take here, and not just freeing the bishop, but that's very nice. And the other way to look at this is knight takes d4, bishop c7 becomes possible, and then not there. Pardon me. c4 is possible in this position, because there's this pin cleverly on the cards. The queen has got no moves here, and if takes, there's a clever tactic in this position which just wins for white. So this is why this is such a clever idea. Can you see white to play and win in this position? If I give you 20 seconds, what would you play here for white? Can you see what this did? In this line. So what we had was d4. So the question is, what would happen in this position after knight takes d4, bishop c7? There's not too many squares for the rook, but say this position. Oh, I keep going to d8. Pardon me. So raise that. c4 takes. White's plan win here. Yeah. Okay. 100 points if you've seen rook takes d4. We've got that pin, and if the pawn tries to go rook c4, the queen. Yeah. We're getting this pawn. So this is a clever idea, it seems. Very clever and nifty, but it's not actually liked by the engines, and sometimes that betrays as a sort of trappy element to it in a way, if there is something better for black to do. And it does cause a weakness of the last move. It is giving black access to e2, and that's taken, that opportunity with queen e2. And this is dangerous now, because there's things like knight f4 immediately threatening the queen and to mate on g2. So we have queen e5 parrying that, holding the f4 square, but now rook e8, and it starts to get a bit dangerous. D takes c5, queen takes is possible, but f6 was played. Queen d6. G5 is interesting in this position to try and play knight f4. This is still interesting, but first, well, to do that though, black actually played check and then brought the knight to f4. So there's a threat here of queen f2 just trying to mate white. If this pawn moves forward, then queen f2 is crushing. White would have to give up the queen. So but there is a defense here to evict this knight or ask it what to do. Bishop c7. That bishop comes into action again, threatening queen takes f4. Knight e2. And it seems here white is actually technically in good shape. It seems it's possible to get control of the position like this with rook a1. That holds g1. And it doesn't seem to matter about g3. This could have been, well, there's bishop g3. That's why that doesn't matter. So this would hold the position, but actually in the game, this is slightly different because the e pawn drops here without a fight. So queen d5 check would have held the e pawn. Now with this e pawn dropping, white it's now a bit problematic. Rook e1, we have rook e5 threatening a mate in 5 with check and knight g3 check. This is actually a mate in 5 contraption. We could win that rook after. We have queen d2 here. Still white is technically okay. Rook e6, queen d7. Black sorts out his back row issues, but also this pawn could be quite dangerous. Bishop b8 is played. Rook e8. Now rook e5. Again threatening queen f4. You might wonder, taking is really bad here. If taking, then this position, we're winning e1. Just winning e1. And there's no time to move this pawn because I think white just gets mated after h4, holding the knight. So, okay, it's a little bit dangerous. It's a little bit dangerous here after rook e5. We have rook f1 being played. Rook g5. Things are homing in on g2. Carolina's getting an attack, it seems. Rook f3. This is a blunder, it seems, rook f3, but it's a difficult position. Better apparently was playing the check and then trying to defend with rook f2. There's a very, very nifty tactic here after what was played. Rook f3. Very nifty. If I told you pin and win as the clue, what would you play here for black? So black to play in this position, very, very nifty tactic. Hope some of you haven't seen this before. So black to play is a crushing tactical blow played in this position at move 45. 100 points if you can find it. Any ideas? So black to play here, there's a crushing tactical blow, I assure you. Engine approved. Okay, I'm going to show you. So well done if you got it. Give yourself 100 points. Rook takes g2 check. Yeah. In fact, this pawn is very helpful to control g4 here against the queen, because now, if here, this is just the forced mate. This is undesirable. It's going to be mating. But after king takes, we have knight d4, and there's no way the queen can now come to g4. This pin, also the knight's holding f5 as well. So what to do about f3? Nothing. We have king g1, and it's the knight and queen are cooperating very well now. After knight d4, there's a threat of mating forward with check, check, and check here. This will be mating soon. We have queen c8 check, queen a6, trying to hold that e2 square from afar. But the resistance has been broken down here. Knight takes c2 check, check here. Black takes time to gobble this pawn, and now the knight comes back to the center powerfully. Knight d4, threatening queen c2 checkmate, and this is pretty hopeless for white. Magnus resigned here. If he plays king d2, there's check, and this pawn actually can come to b3, and it's crushing. It doesn't have to deliver mate. Black doesn't have to deliver mate. This pawn is just winning. And the knight, by the way, is controlling f5. There's no pesky checks to worry about. It's crushing. So yeah, after knight d4, Magnus had to resign this one. This is in round 4. So Caruana got the better of him. Okay, so this is rapid time control. Okay, what do we get from this game? Very complicated game. Very complicated. It's difficult to pinpoint some clear lessons from it. It seems to be quite a tactical struggle. White's d4 move was very tactical in nature, setting some traps it seems, but it did let the queen in, and somehow the queen and knight were coordinating quite aggressively. This pawn never got time to step forward beyond the 5th row, actually. So yeah, white seems to be on the defensive, but the really fatal blunder was allowing the rook takes g2 check. Yeah, there was a way of technically defending with rook f2 at some point. Difficult to defend sometimes, especially against Caruana. So okay, let's have a look at another game. Now you might have heard about this one. You might have heard about this one. This is rapid time control. I think it's 25 minutes each and 10-second increment, I think I mentioned. So Nakamura playing white against Magnus Carlsen. This is in round 5. Nakamura plays d4. We have a Nimzo engine. Or do we? Queen's engine territory, knight f3. We're actually going into the queen's game at decline now by transposition. And we have bishop b4. Now here, very rare move actually by Nakamura. No, it's because I've ordered this wrongly. It's not a rare move. It's it's the 4th most popular move in the position, with 781 games in the live book. Quite very popular is bishop g5 with 2,500 nearly. Also 2,500, about 960. This is 4th on the list, it seems, for popularity. It prompts black to block his c pawn to protect the bishop. We have e3. It's got a logical purpose. Black castles, and queen, which has done its damage, blocking black's c pawn, comes back. Quite often d takes is played here, for example, like this. That's a common position. But we have here a little bit rarer rook e8, and this seems in a way quite, potentially nifty, that the bishop is also given f8. Maybe black consider sometimes moving the bishop back to f8. But okay, so we have bishop d2. e5, that's the other purpose, to push through e5. Now actually this position, bishop d7 has actually been played quite a few times. For example here, a6. Okay, but we have e5 in this game. And we're kind of out of book after this. It seems quite a rare position now, funny enough. Black is threatening, of course, e takes d4. The king's in the center. This looks like dangerous. So it's parried with d takes e5. Knight takes e5. Now, white's not too concerned about this structure thing, because, you know, sometimes you can get that g file to be doing something, but here, so c takes d5 is played, and Magnus does double the pawns, and after g takes f3, this is a really weird one, and shows the world champion might just be human after all. So black to play and blunder. So Magnus Carlsen playing black did actually blunder quite. Unless he had a very deep intention. We'll try and see if there was a deep intention. But can you see black to play and blunder? What did black play here to blunder? What do you think Magnus Carlsen played in this position? Okay, this is a rapid time control, remember that though. So guess the blunder. A bit shocking, I guess. I mean, at some simple level it seems shocking. At some simple level, I think I should emphasize. Yeah. Well, now the engine suggestions in this position is to take on c3. For example, taking on c3. Note though, there's, you know, potential coordination on the g file here. But queen takes d5 looks like scary. This is the engine suggestion. And if bishop takes, then there's actually queen takes f3. So this is holding up this line. It's possible to do this, even though it might look a little bit fatal to do this. It's possible to do this, it seems, for technical reasons. We have potential loose pieces around the place, and it actually stops white castling queenside here. Queen e1 might be a move, and it's not so easy apparently to use this g file. But in this game, Magnus actually played knight takes d5, and white simply plays knight takes d5. Now, he's basically dropping this bishop, because if bishop takes d2 check, queen takes holds the d5 knight. And there's nothing magical for black to do here. There's no resource here. Black's just a piece down. So Magnus tried, well, Magnus took on d5 to at least get this f3. So he drops a bishop. Yes, there's a whole bishop down. He takes on f3. But as mentioned, there's a ready-made road to black's king as well, and coordination point. This actually reminds me, to be honest, I've scored quite a few victories in rapid chess myself. The old George Goodwin rapid plays. I think some of my most enjoyable games were against the Budapest gambit. There's a line where you get the bishop and rook coordinating like this, but this is ready-made and the bishop up. It's a bishop up. Yeah. Okay, we have bishop f5. The queen just offers the exchange with queens. Queen e4. Bishop c3, pointing at black's king. Bishop drops back. But now queen c4. Yeah, white's just a piece up. It's pretty hopeless actually. If, I don't know, black just resigned here. Magnus just resigned. 17 move loss. If he goes back, white could even just carry on with the attack and try and break through. Yeah, so he resigns here. It's pretty bad. It's just the bishop down. it's dangerous for black. This point scoring line, while we're on the subject though, I think it was in the Budapest Gambit, there's a line where you can play like this a little bit and sort of play this, encourage black to take here, and then you play like, well, black's usually clamping down on b4, but the point is you can play like this and then try and use the G file and this bishop. And sometimes I've won quite a few games in rapid chess from this sort of position, because then you can like castle queenside, but you're not usually a bishop up with the G file and the bishop coordinating. It's a line against Budapest where you try and encourage black to actually double the pawns. But anyway, in this game, yeah, we have, yeah, it just reminded me of that. It's kind of dangerous, this position where black's invited to double the pawns, but yeah, there's a dynamic here just waiting to spring into life. This is a disastrous sequence, but yeah, the engines have, believe it or not, this just provoking the ridiculous provocation, but it actually works. This is actually good for black, this position, because we've got a double attack. Yeah, it's interesting, but this would be good for black technically. So yeah, bishop takes c3 seems technically possible. Who would believe it? But it is technically possible here to play bishop takes c3 instead. Much better move than knight takes d5, which basically it loses a piece. Just loses a piece to knight takes d5. So that's a bit shocking, isn't it? What do we say about this game? It's important not to lose pieces in the opening for zero compensation. In fact, the compensation is for white to have a raging attack on g7 and the g file. So yeah, that was Magnus Carlsen's most disastrous rapid game, I think, in the whole event. So anyway, so instructive perhaps, but disastrous. After this, he did start doing quite well though. I don't want to destroy the tension, but I think he did a bit better after. So let's have a look at another game. Leuven Aronian against Magnus Carlsen. Let's flip the board here, see what happened. Okay, d4 from Leuven Aronian. This is in round 3. This is not in chronological order. This is in round 3. So Magnus played e6, inviting a transition to the French defence. But also, after knight f3, there's an opportunity now to play the Dutch defence, which is going to be topical soon in my Evolution of Chess Style series, which I hope some of you are following, because the World Championship match of 1951 between Bronstein and Botvinnik had David Bronstein imitate Botvinnik and play the Dutch defence, but there were loads of Dutch defences played in that 1950 match at a very high level for the time. So anyway, here we have c4. This gets to be wild, this game, because it seems as though this is not sometimes what you'd want to do ideally for white, because it seems there's argument about this position that black has kind of cheated here, in that the pawn is on f5 helping control e4, and as white you might want to avoid this because it looks as though black is getting an extra grip that they shouldn't have had. And I had a game like this with this acceleration against the WGM once in the British Championship, Susan Lalich, and I was lucky to draw that. And it was, I thought, you know, I just gave black everything she wanted. So this looks as though, you know, why play this with white? But actually, this is quite a committal like weakness. Let's see what Magnus Leuven Aronian, pardon me, does. Queen b3. We have Queen e7 protecting the bishop. Bishop d2. b6. So putting more influence on e4 soon. g3, bishop b7, bishop g2. But it gets crazy. This game gets absolutely crazy pretty soon now. Knight c6 is immediately threatening, by the way. Knight takes d4, of course. White castle's protecting the fianchettoed bishop. But we have knight a5, and this is now basically a pawn sack by white of the c4 pawn. But is black cheeky enough to want to take this He hasn't actually even connected, he hasn't castled yet, but Magnus does take it, and you might think there's going to be strong compensation here. Knight b5, yeah, it is. I mean, it's dangerous. You have knight takes d2, knight takes c7 check. Now, yeah, this is madness. Okay, I think one of the moves to avoid for sure here is king f7. This isn't played. I think king f7, we get this other knight in with check, and this is absolutely winning for white, non-controversially. No, the king has to avoid that. King f8. And now we have knight takes d2. The principal threat now is bishop takes b7, so we have bishop takes g2 addressing that. King takes. Rook c8. Now this does look like a scary pin, and there's another factor. Doesn't this actually backfire because of knight e6? That's one question here. Doesn't the pin backfire? In the game we have knight f3. Let's just ask this. If knight takes e6, this backfires, this tactic. Black doesn't have to take the knight and lose the rook. And this is a crazy variation, but king f7, then we're hitting the queen and hitting the knight. And you might think, well, knight g5, but then we can hit the knight again. So we're hitting the queen and we're hitting the knight. And black ends up gobbling this knight potentially on g5, and this is why I think this whole thing is crazy. This is madness. This line is absolute madness. But black will be winning here. What do you think about that, guys? This is crazy stuff. But knight takes e6 is not working. So in the game we have knight f3. But it's okay for white still, for the moment, even though this looks terrible. This is holding g5, so actually white is threatening now knight e6. That line doesn't actually work now. To try and, well, white is threatening knight takes e6. Now, we have queen d8 protecting the rook against that knight takes e6. Rook ac1. And again, threatening knight takes e6 and queen takes c8 here. So some defensive skills are needed in this position. In fact, it's pretty precarious here, because if king g8, then knight takes e6 is still good, because it hits the queen and the rook. So if rook takes, we have knight takes d8, and white's laughing in this position. White's doing well here. White's got that c file. The knight's pretty good. There's all sorts of threats, like a knight coming to f7. So yeah, tricky position, but Magnus finds what seems to be a really, really good move. Well, he has to address knight takes e6 again, and he can't do this because we've got knight e5 check. What he plays is actually king e7. And there's nothing concrete, it seems, here for white. And in fact, black now threatens to terminate this knight with bishop d6 on that pin. White plays queen a4, hitting the bishop, getting out of the pin. Rook takes, and white's still okay. White's fine here. But that was a crazy thing with the king on e7. This is like a crazy looking position, but they're actually equal on pawns now. h6 taking out that g5 square. King g1. Yeah, king g1. Yeah, interesting. But okay, queen d7. I mean, now black is threatening just to play rook this. Rook c8. White takes on c7 to get that c file potentially, but also this d5 is played now, which looks dangerous. Either rook c1 or d5, they both look dangerous for different reasons, but d5 is actually played here. And there's a specific tactical point in this position that's being made. Well, first of all, let's examine e5. In this position, knight takes d5 was played, but if e5, then knight h4 hits f5 and threatens knight g6 check, which is horrible, which is bad. So black plays this, and now knight h4 is played anyway, still threatening both of those things. Knight g6 to win the rook, and knight takes f5 just to nab a pawn. We have rook c8 getting out the fork, but knight takes f5 getting the pawn back. Queen takes d5, and yeah, we're getting simplification out of all of this craziness. But can Magnus win this position with the black pieces? Queen's come off. Should be a draw, shouldn't it? The engine has it as 0-0. This position, move 31. Shouldn't it be a draw after all that craziness? d5. Trying to get to the second rank, or maybe a check first, then gobble some pawns. Perhaps white should stand steady with king f2, but actually he took that. A little bit surprising, maybe. It activates the black rook. This looks stronger actually than rook c2, which would mean rook b5 is possible. So the check is a little bit stronger to run with checks to win b2 for sure. Black's got the 2-1 pawn majority. Can Magnus grind out a win here? It's a rapid time control. Does the grinding still work at rapid? We're going to find out. Yeah, it's going to be 2-0 pawn majority soon. 2-0. White's got his own pass pawn. This is good, driving the pawn forward from behind. And actually, black's pawn is pretty fast here. He does that. After f7, it's reaching a finale of this race with a2. And actually, I think Leuven resigned in this position. Basically, black is queening first. If rook g8, then do we just queen actually? And yeah, if this is the best, it's not very happy to be queen against rook. And there's also this pawn coming anyway. There's no fortress or anything. So yeah, Magnus queens before white does. That's a bit crazy in the opening, that self pin, all the stuff with knight e6, but brilliant play, accurate play to avoid disasters. And I think that is a sign of strength. You know, when looking at, like, for example, a Paul Kerr's game this morning, very early in the morning, about 6 AM, I got up to look at a Paul Kerr's game, and it didn't seem impressive. And actually I uploaded the video, and I noticed, hold on a sec, couldn't black have taken something? And I thought it was only queen for 2 rooks, and I realised black would just end up being a whole rook down. You know, the tactics which strong players avoid is strong evidence for their strength, their ability not to be just destroyed tactically. And Magnus displayed that here really. He avoided all the nightmare variations with knight e6. That is a testament. You to appreciate, you know, their games, you've got to see what they avoided really. It's got to be spelled out sometimes by an annotator. What have they avoided? What disasters have they avoided to appreciate the game more? So I hope I've shown you at least a glimpse of what black avoided, because this seemed quite dangerous with all these knight takes e6 possibilities in this game. And he ground that end game. It seems white didn't have to take on d5. White, perhaps with best play, should have drawn that end game. It seems maybe Leuven is not comfortable with rapid time control or something. I think ordinarily, surely he would have held that rook and pawn ending. What do you think? He should have held that rook and pawn ending. Was there anything special here? If this position after king f2, I don't think there is. The engine thinks it's dead equal. We've got this pawn, but I don't think it's a major thing, this position here. You know, we've got equal, there's no pawn majority. Okay, there's, you know, we've got a pawn majority here, and we've got a centre pawn, but it's not going anywhere. Should have been that equal anyway. It's rapid chess, whatever. So that was the beginning of the end, I think, taking on d5 in this position. Okay. I actually just scrapped the video as soon as I noticed this flaw, by the way, in the Keras game, and I re-uploaded it because I don't, in principle, want to upload analysis which doesn't have these pitfalls highlighted, even if, you know, they're a little bit behind the scenes. So anyway, it shows the strength to avoid this stuff. So okay, Magnus Carlsen against Anand, wishing Anand. We have, let's play from White's perspective, e4. Now I'm going to give you 20 seconds to assess the opening position because I need to nip off to the loo. So we're going to get the opening position and you can check it out to give your evaluation verdicts. Now, I'll just get you to it. We're in live book with a4, that's quite a popular move, yeah. Okay, around about here, it's about equal at the moment actually. But we have knight g4 from Vichy. h3, knight takes. Here's the position which some imbalance has occurred. So tell me what you think about this position. I'm going to give you at least 30 seconds. I'll be back soon. Okay, I hope you got some verdicts. Looks nice to have the F file. Alright, let's see what happened. Okay, from this position then. Yeah, Queen E7. We have Queen B3 putting some pressure on F7 and B7. And note also, you know, this does mean something here. C6. We have D4 now. And one pitfall here to avoid is black being greedy with E4. I think this just fails tactically. Black played bishop e6. If he plays this, we get a Mr. Bean variation. I'm going to have to start calling these Mr. Bean variations, because the king is just drawn out with bishop takes f7. It's just crushing. Queen takes f7, drawing the king out. Knight g5 check. Kind of end of game. White's the exchange up. So that's to be avoided. It's crushing. Otherwise here, this is crushing as well. Can't take on e4 here. So bishop e6, just avoiding all that stuff. Protecting f7. We have bishop takes e6. Now black's got to be careful about b7 here as well. If queen takes, then there's queen takes b7. And let's just check this out again here, this position. This is still good for white, this position. Apparently it's a little bit better for white, but anyway, we have f takes e6 holding b7. Rook ad1. Now white threatens just yeah, to double the pawns and try and use the d file. In particular, actually, this pawn's pinned. There is actually a more specific idea as well. To be able to play rook f5 if possible, to use that pinned pawn on e5. We have rook ae8, which holds e6. Now queen b4 is played here. I don't think this sort of stuff is dangerous, because there's always like rook takes f1. I'm not sure rook f5 does anything here. Queen c5, that should be okay, because the rook is holding e6. This isn't a problem. It's not losing. Okay, so that rook e8, adding some weight to the fence. So we have queen b4, e takes d4, c takes d4, e5, white takes on e5, takes. Now there's something bad about this position for black. Something really bad is happening here, that actually white controls the d file. White also controls key squares with his double pawns, and black is basically running out of counterplay here pretty rapidly. White can establish authority on that d file, doubling rooks. Black tries to improve the knight. The knight is not with great scope at the moment. It tries to reroute. Now we have knight d2. This knight's going to get to a very painful square for black, putting pressure on e5, and there's a nice bind on all of these pawns at the moment. This is getting painful. Knight f7. The rook is driven back, and it looks as though that could be useful to have the knight there. We have rook f5, h6. The knight's kicked back, and in fact, instead of using c4, this is also quite juicy though, but knight b3 here, the knight is going for an even juicier square on leaning over on b7, knight f6, knight c5, and protecting e4 quite crucially. So black here is being run out of counterplay. In fact, the fixing of pawns is being carried out on both sides of the board. If you look at a lot of games of, say, Michael Adams, he's known as the Spider, sort of spinning this web of paralysis quite often with this. You can see this web of paralysis being spun here actually. It's probably no coincidence, because actually I think Michael Adams was one of Magnus Carlsen's seconds actually at the last World Championship. I think he respects Adams' style of play, but black is being strangled here on both sides of the board. The pawn movements have been, you know, stopped. The pawns are dying here. All of black's pawns are dead. White controls the d-file. You might think, is there some saving tactical ideas? Not really. The knight's holding e4. There's no little surprise here because we can either take on f7 and just win material. There's no little surprise there because we're taking on e7 next. Black can't do anything here. He's running into a zugzwang position almost. King h7 loses even more territory. I mean, it's a difficult position. Maybe rook e8 is the suggestion here. But after king h7, he's losing even more territory. After rook d8 now. If we look at this position, what on earth can black do? Can he even move the rook? Can he do this? No, he'd lose this pawn. What can black do here? Black's left with moving the g pawn basically. So he moves the g pawn. We have hg, king takes. But now this goes into a terrible pin after rook d6. Black tries to unpin, but now check. And there's a point to this, going back into that horrible pin. If he doesn't, then, I mean, let's have a look. Why did Vichy want to go back into the pin? If he goes here, knight d8 is really crushing because we're hitting the rook and we're hitting the knight twice. So if here we just pick up a piece. So the king is actually trying to assist the knight here, but still knight d8 is strong. It's forking f7 and b7 potentially. Not at the moment. I mean, this rook's protecting b7, but here now black is being run out of moves. g4. So we've got a pin here, we've got a pin here, we've got a pressure point here. Black has got one free pawn. If he, I don't know what else he moves, he's going to lose material. He can't move this rook. Drop f6 with check. If he moves this rook, then knight e6 forks both rooks actually. So, okay, he can move a pawn. I don't think he can move this pawn actually, because then g takes is horrible. And then actually winning this one after, because here we've got, well, that check. End of game. So he can move his c pawn, that's about it. Black can move his c pawn. But the cruel move played here is just to say, okay, what are you moving now? After b3, what are you moving now? Something's going to give here. This is like Zugzwang now. By the way, on stream, Andy Hammond, I used to know an Andy Hammond playing for Uxbridge Chess Club on occasion. It's not the same Andy Hammond, is it? About 190 ECF to 200. So just out of interest, Andy Hammond 32. You're not Andy Hammond that I used to know from Uxbridge Chess Club, are you? So anyway, okay, b7 is dropping. Knight takes b7 is possible, you'd think, soon. Yes, because black hasn't got any other moves in this position. Can't move the knight. So yeah, he's dropping b7. And yeah, this knight's still pinned anyway. And this one's like next. And if rook c8, then actually, well, we could take this one as well. Actually, we could just take this one. It's horrible leaving this pin here. And if black ever tries to unpin, well, there's other pawns dropping. All the pawns are dropping. We can just take this one, for example. And if here, this is just a disaster, basically. Yeah, it's too many pawns are biting the dust here. So yeah, I think so. It was given up. The ghost was given up here in this game. After knight takes b7, things are all dropping because that takes out the support for a6 a6 is dropping next, c5 after that. Well, anyway, Vichy didn't want to see the position anymore. I think he resigned. I don't think he lost on time. Alright, so, oh yeah, something horrible happened here. Black just lost counterplay, was run out of counterplay by Magnus. The rot started with white controlling the d file, I think, and fixing the pawns on the queen side. So fixing the pawns on the king side, you're just heading to run the opponent out of zugzwang if you can do this sort of stuff. So their compulsion to move is just losing material. Alright, yeah, that was, I don't know, that was strange. Oh, it was just strange, wasn't it? It's okay, let's go on to another one. So that was against Vichy Anna, and let's have a look at against Kramnik. I thought this was really weird opening now. We're going to see. Kramnik played knight f3. Magnus plays e6 again. g3. Now, surprise move already. It has been played quite a few times before. b5. So not only trying to challenge Kramnik's fianchetto bishop, but also suppress c4. Leuven suggests this is the most popular move, just to play bishop g2. We have e4 though. Bishop b7. Black counterattacks white's centre pawn. And that would be more important than losing b5, you'd think. Queen e2 preserving the e-pawn. The engine does, well, this one does like this for some reason, but in principle I think to humans we don't like doing this, losing a centre pawn, but you know, I think black should be okay. We have queen e2. I think the centre pawns provide central control, which provides good pieces, which provide an easier to play position. So you don't generally want to lose your centre pawn for a flank pawn. c5, bishop g2, a6 protecting b5 finally. Castles, knight f6. And this game reminds me now of the classic Karpov against Miles game, because it's like a sort of souped up French defence with black having a nice knight on d5. It looks as though black's got a good position at the opening in some respects. So b3, we have knight c6, bishop b2, bishop e7, knight c3, knight takes, d takes, which gives an idea that white is interested in clamping down on d6 and using that d file and playing c4 later. So yeah, we get that idea. Now we have h4. Now Magnus undermines the centre here with f6. You might think, hang on a sec, what is going on with this c takes b5 business? Let's try and answer that question, because rook a8, isn't this giving the b5 pawn? And to be honest, I stumbled upon this game recently, which this reminds me of, giving up the b5 pawn seemingly casually. There was a game, Korchnoi against Daniel King, who's one of the greatest commentators, where Korchnoi actually lost to Daniel King, taking a similar sort of analogous b pawn. The thing is, black's pieces can spring into life if this b pawn is taken here. So in the Korchnoi King game, there was something very similar to this idea, that black has got things potentially like knight b4 for bishop a6, but here, just like even rook a6 though, and black springing into life, there's always ideas of bishop a6 now, because this is a pure tactical liability, this diagonal. If a4 bang, bishop a6, winning. So this mysterious loss of the b pawn, this is a neat trick I think, for us all to somehow understand that sometimes you can just bait the opponent to take with the queen, well, pawns like this. But here, yeah, rook a8, it just doesn't seem good to do this, because rook a8, if the queen gets out of the way, then we just take here, and black's doing very well, because he has got things like knight b4 and bishop a6 coming in. If we try and just giving black loads of counterplay, basically loads and loads of counterplay. For example, like this, even take here on e5. So in a nutshell, black's just much better here actually. This taking the b, this looks like a poisoned pawn. It was avoided anyway. It was avoided. So h4, and it's offered again here, f6. This b pawn. If we look at it here, is there much of a difference if we look at it here? Actually, a little bit of a difference. This isn't the strongest move apparently, because this position is okay, much more okay for white. So possibly knight b4 here. We're going to do a bishop a6. I don't want to labour this too much, but black's getting some play again. So anyway, so f6, e takes, bishop takes, and actually we do get to see the b pawn being gobbled finally. G takes looks curious. You might think rook takes f6. Actually, the engine prefers rook takes f6 anyway. But you know, G takes f6 was played, and white does go for that b pawn now. He can't resist here. He does take it. So there's two principal concrete resources here: knight b4 for bishop a6, or rook a8 for bishop a6. They're relying on the queen's sensitivity and this diagonal being a tactical skew liability. And we see that now, knight b4. So threatening the skewer, bishop a6. It also, of course, hits two pawns here. Great way. I would say this is a suave way. I would go so far. This is kind of a suave way to generate counterplay. Just casually give up your b pawn, and just you get loads of counterplay because the queens are subject to a lot of tempo gains potentially. Okay, so white gives up one of the pawns back after queen e2, and again the queen's like a target now because knight c3 is threatened. And yeah, Magnus is technically looking good. Well, looking okay. White's still okay, in fact. Rook a1. Sorry. Rook a1 might have been the better move than what was played. So in the game here, queen c4 was played. King h8. You might think in this position d5, but here check is annoying and targeting. Yeah, that's okay for white. So anyway, we have king h8, rook a1, rook a8. The knight's temporarily, it seems, well, it's got b4 though. It's got b4. It's not stranded. Let's not say it's stranded. Rook fe1, d5, queen g4 without it being check, which means e5 is possible. And black is getting the upper hand, it seems, around here. Black is, I don't know, something's gone wrong for white. I think it's become a tricky position to play anyway. It has, because black's got, you know, the more pawns in the center, and he's getting a lot of pressure now. Another tempo gain on the queen. Bishop drops back, just nudging the queen to h4. White doesn't go back to g4 though. White plays knight h2. It seems, you know, to play this and this seems as though it's has white's position really been reduced to this. Okay, but okay, it can be dangerous to get a fawn pawn on h6, of course. Knight b4, rook takes, bishop takes. Black is threatening knight takes c2, that's addressed. Knight c2 hitting the rook. The knight's also coming potentially to d4 now, which it does, offering a pawn in the process temporarily. Queen f7, Queen e4, double protecting the pawn. Rook d8. The fawn pawn is installed. Is it enough for white to do this? This is a very, very dangerous tactical element, having a fawn pawn. I'm a big fan of fawn pawns, but is it enough here? The thing is, the problems for white, this knight's a bit of a monster at the moment. Well, that's one of the main problems. And okay, so bishop takes d5, queen g4. Okay, here Magnus took this pawn off to try and get a running pawn here, running past pawn. Maybe taking here is okay as well, like this. Addressing mates might be okay as well, apparently. But he took the pawn, so we got a pass pawn on the way. Rook a1, bishop e6, queen e4, queen g6, and the fawn pawn shows its teeth here. White plays an interesting tactical move, rook a8. So threatening to mate actually. If queen takes, then we've got a mate almost, well, almost. There's bishop g8, just winning a rook. Can't do that anyway. So after rook a8, this has got to be addressed. We have rook g8. Black's a pawn up. He's got this passed pawn, and the knight is still mega dangerous on d4 here. That does seem to carry a little bit of danger, but is it enough? Rook takes g8, bishop takes. Yeah, this is just horrible actually, this position for white. If he moves his queen, there's it's just grovelly. It's just grovelly. Anyway, white just took the queens off, which probably just helps black. This looks initially as though it's a big problem. The thing is, black can afford to sack a pawn here. He's already a pawn up. He wants to just push his pawn anyway. He just pushes the pawn, getting some time for that passed pawn. It's going to be winning a piece soon. It wins a piece. One question we might be worried about with black is, do we have to try and mate with bishop and knight if we lose all our pawns? That pawn's preserved for a moment. e3, takes, g4, knight d5, and here the thing is, white, I don't think white's in any way going to get this pawn at the moment anyway. He actually took on d5, so the cheeky thing to do from most club players' perspectives is to get rid of the remaining pawn, to force your opponent to try and mate with bishop and knight, and hopefully they run out of time or forget how to do it. But it's not happening here, okay, because Kramnik played knight takes d5, and that looks as though, you know, most of black's problems are solved being a bishop up. But if knight e4, this is just good for black anyway. It's going to try and win these pawns or something. Anyway, so he simplified. Knight takes d5, bishop takes. There is the problem. Okay, how to avoid, you know, this pawn queening if you want to get your king out and about. But Magnus shows that actually the bishop can be used to blockade the pawn here. If h7, then we drop back to g7. Otherwise, we're getting the bishop here first. And I think anything wins here. King e8 looks strange, but King e7 was winning as well. White's in a zugzwang. You can gain a move here to create a zugzwang with bishop h7, zugzwang. White resigns here. It's pretty clear that these pawns are all going to drop. If here, then we immediately grab them, and the other way is just we're going to grab them through zugzwang here. And there you go. Then they'll drop. So yeah, that was the end of that one. Yeah, just this zugzwang. Yeah, so that was a novel opening played by black, that early b5. So there's hope. There is a way to create an interesting game when the opponent plays one knight f3. Apparently you can create an interesting game, especially in rapid time controls. So that's something for the entertainers to make note of for their own repertoires. If you want an interesting game, knight f3, e6, g3, b5. It's a fun sequence, isn't it? b5. It's got some popularity behind it. It has been played quite a bit before. This b5, a very early b5. So it seems as though black had quite an interesting position there and opportunities during that game. Okay, but the b5 pawn sack is worthy of note as well, as an elegant way of generating counterplay. Giri against Carlsen. Let's have a look at Giri against Carlsen. So let's play from Magnus' perspective. Magnus played with black the Caro-Kann against Giri. So this is in round 7. And we have the advanced variation, e6. We have bishop e2. And now this is a very novel move. Sometimes you might think black's got some congestion issues, but it was quite novelly resolved here with this check. So this bishop is going to come around here and hit the pawn chain at the head, and it does mean there's less congestion as well. So it's a bit of a neat trick for Caro-Kann players to make a note of. Get the bishop round there. Okay. And then where are the congestion issues? Okay, we have rook e1 being played here. Now another strange looking move by Magnus, knight h6. The bishop's not lying h6 here, so the knight can creep back to put even more pressure on e5. Knight f1. Black doesn't mind actually about bishop h6 here. He plays f takes. If bishop takes h6, this is okay for black, just about. Should be okay. There's no problem here. Win e5 there even. So it's tempting to damage structure, but it's pointless. It's mostly pointless. D takes e5 was played. Black castled. But here actually Giri was tempted to damage structure with bishop takes h6. He does give up the dark square bishop. In doing so, of course, queen d4, holding e5. e5 is put under more scrutiny after bishop e4. Not only bishop takes f3 looks dangerous, but I think there's also some venom in this position if white's not careful. There's another idea here, venomous, after bishop e4. So I want to demonstrate this. White played knight g3. Now if he doesn't play knight g3, right, let's just give a token move for a moment. Knight takes e5. Knight takes. Bishop b6 on f2 after. If the queen goes back, this is crushing because now we've got g2. It's just crushing, absolutely. So there's that sort of threat after bishop e4. This giving up the dark square bishop is not so funny, is it, when you've got an f2 problem, because you haven't got a dark square bishop to defend anything on the dark squares. So this kind of tactic is lethal on f2. Yeah, this looks lethal if white's not careful. So he plays knight g3. But the simple threat is also, by the way, just to mention, the simple threat is just to take here and play this. Threats of rook takes f3 and knight takes e5. It's difficult to meet. You can take here. So dark square disasters in a few directions here. So knight g3 was played. We have c5. Now this is taken to weaken e5. Okay, queen. Now the queen is looking at h6, but that's parried, so still leaving e5 weak. Takes. e5 is weak, pretty weak. Bishop g4, that's protected, so e5 is still weak and unprotectable. Rook e2. That's taken, hitting the bishop. And if the bishop goes here, then squash. g4, end of game. The bishop goes here, and it's near the end of the game anyway. The bishop's not in a great spot. Rook d8, with ideas of d4, d3, etc. Rook d1, c4. So the knight's going to come to d3, looking at f2, and the bishop's going to come here, looking at f2. Knight f1 was played, knight d3, and actually I think Giri resigned here. I'm not sure he ran out of time. I think he just resigned in this position. If he takes on e6, then we can either take this one or this one. Actually, either are about quite strong. If it takes, for example, here, knight e4, then we've got this horrible stuff like bishop b6 check. This is just horrible. In fact, the rook is also stranded here potentially, but it's just terrible. It's just terrible. So yeah, I think he just like resigns here after knight d3. I don't know if you think that's premature. If bishop f3, trying to defend f2, this is still painful, bishop here, because then we've got things like knight takes in here. We can't defend this. For example, here, even e5 for e4. I think the problem is f2 is always painful here. We could just, it's going to be a disaster on f2. It's so easy to play for black by this stage anyway. It's just so easy after something like knight d3. I don't know, you might not be convinced, so if you want any further questions on this, post them to YouTube when I upload it to YouTube later. Why White would have resigned here. It seems maybe a little bit premature. So that's after move 23. The engine has it nearly +3 for black. The line, I mean, it gives is this. I'll follow this through a bit more. There's pressure on f2. Maybe it's pure torture. Yeah, this sort of thing. I don't know. This is a long way off, but you can't play this position. I mean, as a human, you cannot play this position with this monster knight on d3 and this sort of stuff pointing in your direction. It becomes totally unplayable from a human. It just, the difficulty of playing the position is just rising there. The temperature's rising. So anyway, so yeah, you might not agree, but that's what happened. Giri, I think, resigned here. I'm not sure he ran out of time or anything. So one last game to check out. Well, that was interesting from the dark square perspective, but in principle, yeah, playing to double the opponent's pawns, you've got to make sure, are you strong enough on that color complex before you give up your bishop just to double pawns. I mean, that's one thing to think about. Carlsen against Topalov. Let's have a quick look at Carlsen against Topalov. This is the last game I want to check out. So Magnus playing white. We have a Nimzo engine. Pretty standard theory here. Knight d2. It's pretty standard stuff. It's all been seen before. Knight e5. Queen b2 looks quite nifty, getting out that pin, the pin c pawn. White does give up the dark square bishop here, but the queen's coming off. And okay, d6 is going to be a target potentially in this position. White's trying to clamp down on d6, put pressure on d6. Okay, f4, g4, exchanging off this defender on the light squares, or not. Bishop e2, not yet. Now here, this is changing the game. This a5. It didn't need to do a5. It does provide a fixed target on b6, and that is tapped into now. First, the bishop takes that diagonal, but b6 is now a backward pawn, which is targeted and taken here. In fact, black doesn't bother trying to defend it. If he tries to defend it, a5, just a5, it's going to be 1 anyway. So we have rook c8 trying to counter attack on this pawn, but that pawn drops. An extra pawn, and it's an outside pass pawn. Okay, the knight moves here, potentially coming to d4. So the bishop dare not lose control of e6. He might want to take that, but then rook takes is better for white. With the knight coming to d4 after, it's very unpleasant. So the bishop sticks around king e1. But here, black starts to lose all his pawns anyway, because knight d4 is also threatened. This is dropping, it seems. It drops immediately. The bishop takes there, but now rook e5, and it's skewer land. The king can't even protect here, because then there'd be bang, rook takes f5 with knight d4. So this pawn's dropping now. And yeah, it's like 3 pawns up. Topalov resigned. And I would have gone into more detail slower on this game, but I've got to go to dinner now. So I hope you got something from this game as well. I know this was very brief, and I apologise for that. But we'll carry on next week. But this covers actually Magnus Carlsen's decisive games in this session. All his decisive games I think we've had at least a brief look at. So I hope you got something from it. Likes are really appreciated. So if you did like the video, then please like it. So yeah, this looks like a Nimzo engine grind in a nutshell. d6 was a problem. a5 is, I think, questionable to me. It did lead to seemingly a big target on b6, which led to d6, which led to black losing most of his pawns. Okay, alright, so have a good week, and yeah, comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much. Okay,